There is a moment. It's quiet. Most people would miss it if they weren't looking directly at the person's face when it happens. It's the moment a narcissist looks at you and understands, somewhere underneath all their usual noise, that you finally see them. Not the version of them they built for public consumption. Not the charm, not the performance, not the polished character they spent years training you to believe was the real thing. You see what's actually sitting underneath all of that. The hollow place. The fear they never let anyone near. The emptiness they've spent an entire lifetime running from and covering up. And once that happens, once you actually see it, something between the two of you shifts permanently. You might not have the vocabulary for it in that exact second. You might still be piecing together what just occurred. But your body already knows. Your nervous system already knows, even before your conscious mind catches up. Something ancient and tired inside you finally lets out a breath it's been holding for years, while something inside them starts to quietly panic. If you've ever lived through that precise moment, if you've ever felt the ground shift under someone you loved the instant you stopped swallowing their version of events, then keep reading, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to make a lot of things click into place. What happens inside a narcissist, the second they realize you can see straight through them, is honestly one of the most intense psychological unravelings a person can witness up close. And the frustrating part is that most people who go through this never get a warning. Nobody sits them down beforehand and explains what they're about to watch happen. Nobody prepares them for how strange and disorienting it's going to feel to watch someone's mask slide sideways in real time. For as long as the relationship lasted, the narcissist was quietly running on one fuel source above everything else. And that fuel source was your belief in them, your willingness to doubt yourself before you ever doubted them. Your habit of questioning your own memory, your own perception, your own gut instinct long before you question theirs. That dynamic, not affection, not partnership, not anything resembling real intimacy, was the actual foundation the whole relationship sat on. It was control, dressed up as closeness, and it was built brick by brick on the slow erosion of your own inner certainty. So the moment that erosion stops, the moment you start trusting what your own eyes are telling you again, the entire structure they spent years constructing around you begins to crack down the middle. At first, they don't consciously register it, not in a clear or articulate way. They just sense it, the way an animal senses a change in weather before the sky actually shifts. Narcissists tend to lack real emotional intelligence, the kind that lets a person sit with someone else's feelings and genuinely understand them, but they are unnervingly observant in a different, more predatory way. They pick up on tiny details most people would never think to track. A pause before you respond that wasn't there before. A tone in your voice that no longer shakes. A silence that used to be filled instantly with your apology, now just sitting there, comfortable and unbothered. Eye contact that no longer breaks or flinches under pressure. They feel that shift in your energy long before you've said a single word out loud to confirm it. And internally, something starts coming undone in them, because the version of you they were counting on, the anxious one, the self-doubting one, the one who apologized first and asked questions later, is quietly disappearing in front of them. This is usually where the behavior pattern kicks in, and even though it feels chaotic and unpredictable while you're living through it, it almost always follows the same basic sequence. The first move tends to be panic wearing the costume of charm. All of a sudden, they're softer than they've been in months, maybe years. They're more attentive, more present, more interested in you than they've bothered to be in a long time. They start bringing up memories they used to roll their eyes at or mock outright. They look at you the way they used to look at you back at the very beginning, in that early stretch when everything felt magical and slightly disorienting at the same time. This is not love making a comeback. This is love bombing, rebooting itself out of pure survival instinct, not out of any real emotional awakening. They aren't trying to reconnect with the person you are now. They're trying to reinstall the version of you they had access to before, and they're trying to do it before you fully wake up and realize what's happening. If you've lived through this stretch, you know exactly how disorienting it can be, because some quiet part of you wants to believe it's real. Some part of you wants to think maybe they finally understood what they did to you. Maybe this time really is different. That part of you isn't foolish or weak, despite what you might tell yourself in hindsight. That part of you is wounded. It's the part that spent years waiting for an apology that never showed up, waiting for accountability that never arrived, hoping for the version of them they only ever let you glimpse in flashes, just enough to keep you holding on. The love bombing isn't targeting your intelligence. It's targeting that specific wound, the one that's been open for a long time and desperately wants to close. But when the charm offensive doesn't pull you back in, when you manage to stay calm, when you stop reacting the way you used to, when you finally stop chasing them for reassurance or explanation, the next phase begins. And this is where the mask starts slipping in ways they genuinely cannot control anymore, no matter how hard they try. Rage tends to show up next. Sometimes it's loud and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, almost silent, hiding behind a smile so cold it makes the whole room feel smaller and colder along with it. That rage was never really about anything specific you did or didn't do. It's about losing psychological access to you, full stop. For years, they could reach inside you and rearrange your entire emotional state with a single sentence, a certain look, a heavy sigh, a sudden and unexplained withdrawal of warmth. Now, none of that works the same way. And to a narcissist, losing that kind of access feels less like disappointment and more like dying, because their entire sense of self was never something they built internally. It was constructed entirely from the reflection they saw bouncing back at them through your reactions. When you stop reflecting them the way they've come to need, they don't just feel rejected in the ordinary sense, they feel erased. That's exactly why their reactions start to feel so wildly out of proportion to whatever small thing supposedly triggered them. That's why a calm boundary can land on them like a declaration of war. That's why your silence provokes them far more than your tears ever used to. That's why your indifference cuts them deeper than any accusation could. In their internal world, you were never really a separate, whole person with your own inner life. You were an extension of their identity, a limb they didn't know they depended on until it stopped moving the way they wanted. So the moment you take yourself back, they experience it almost like a kind of psychological amputation, sudden and disorienting and impossible for them to rationalize away. Then comes the cold shoulder, the withdrawal, the sudden vanishing of warmth and communication and presence all at once. Here's the part most people don't fully grasp about the narcissistic version of the silent treatment. It isn't avoidance in the ordinary sense of someone needing space. It's punishment. Deliberate and calculated, engineered specifically to activate every abandonment wound you've ever carried. They know precisely what your nervous system does when they go quiet, because they studied it for years without you ever realizing you were being studied. They memorized every reaction, used it repeatedly to keep you anxious, keep you attentive, keep you eager to repair things and apologize for offenses you never actually committed. Now that they sense you slipping out of their orbit, they reach for that same old weapon, hoping against hope it still has the same effect it always used to. But something inside you has changed by this point. The silence that used to break you into pieces now just feels like breathable air. The distance that used to terrify you now feels closer to clarity than to fear. Maybe for the first time, you notice how peaceful your body actually feels when they're not in the room with you. You notice your shoulders drop, your breathing deepen, your thoughts slowly return to belonging to you again instead of orbiting around them. That realization tends to be one of the most painful and at the same time, most liberating moments a survivor ever goes through, because you understand quietly but completely that the person you loved was also the ongoing source of the chronic stress your body had been carrying for years without you fully naming it as such. When the silent treatment fails to bring you back, projection ramps up. Suddenly, you're the one being labeled the manipulator. You're the cold one, the cruel one, the unstable one, the abusive one. Every single thing they did to you gets repackaged, relabeled, and handed right back to you as though it describes who you are. If you aren't psychologically steady in that moment, it can genuinely shake you down to your foundation. Because being accused of the exact things that were done to you is one of the most disorienting experiences a person can go through. It functions like a kind of psychological inversion, a mirror held up backwards so everything you see reflected looks reversed from reality. But here's the truth it usually takes years to fully absorb. Projection is confession wearing a disguise. Every accusation they throw at you is really a small piece of autobiography they can't consciously admit to writing. Every label they try to pin on you is actually a description of parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding and running from. And once you truly see this, once it settles into your bones rather than just your intellect, their words start losing their grip on you. They stop landing as insults and start registering as noise, then eventually as evidence, proof of everything you had quietly suspected but were too afraid to say out loud for far too long. After that comes the blame shifting, the rewriting of shared history, the careful and almost surgical reconstruction of memories you both lived through together. Suddenly, they didn't do the thing you remember them doing. You misremembered it. You exaggerated it. You're too sensitive, too dramatic, twisting their words to fit a narrative that only exists in your head. You provoked them into it, forced their hand somehow. And for years, you may have absorbed every bit of that, apologizing for things that were actually done to you, quietly rewriting your own memories to fit their version just to keep some fragile piece intact. But now, something inside you refuses to keep doing that. Something in you remembers clearly. Something in you finally, fully believes itself without needing outside confirmation. And this, more than the rage or the silence or the projection, is what genuinely terrifies them. Because a narcissist can survive your anger. They can survive your tears. They can even survive being accused outright. What they cannot survive is your clarity, your calm, your quiet, unwavering certainty. The particular look in your eyes that says, without a single word attached to it, I see exactly who you are now, and I am no longer afraid of what that means. When charm, rage, silence, projection, and blame shifting all fail to pull you back into their orbit, the narcissist tends to escalate into more desperate territory. Intimidation starts showing up. Triangulation enters the picture. Reputation attacks begin, sometimes subtly, sometimes not subtly at all. Suddenly other people are involved who weren't involved before. Friends who used to genuinely like you start looking at you differently, like something's shifted that they can't quite name. Family members who never used to question your choices start asking pointed, loaded questions out of nowhere. Co-workers seem to shift in your presence in ways that feel small but unmistakable. Mutual friends start pulling away without much explanation. You feel all of this happening before you can actually prove any of it. Behind the scenes, the narcissist has been quietly planting seeds, dropping carefully chosen hints, slowly painting you as unstable, ungrateful, difficult, unwell, unkind. They're building a narrative and recruiting allies for it, constructing an alternate version of reality where they play the victim and you're recast as the threat. This tends to be one of the most painful stages of the whole waking up process because you're not only losing the person you once loved, you're sometimes losing people you genuinely trusted. People who accepted the story before they ever thought to ask you a single question about it. And the grief that comes with that loss is heavy, it's layered. It's more complicated than ordinary grief because it's not just about losing one relationship, it's about losing an entire social reality you had assumed was stable and permanent. But here's something survivors eventually come to understand and even find peace in. The people who believed the smear campaign without ever checking in with you directly were never truly your people to begin with. They were extensions of the narcissist's public mask, stage props in a performance you didn't even realize you were part of until the curtain dropped. And while losing them stings in the moment, their absence eventually turns into a strange kind of cleansing. Your circle gets smaller, but it gets realer, quieter, but far more honest. Less crowded, but genuinely safe for the first time in a long while. Then comes triangulation in its more classic form. A new person gets introduced into the picture, a new ally, a new romantic interest, a new admirer paraded out where you're sure to notice, specifically designed to provoke jealousy, insecurity, and comparison in you. This has nothing to do with love. It's choreography, plain and simple. That new person isn't a replacement for you in any meaningful sense. They're a tool, a polished mirror held up to your face one more time, meant to make you question your own worth just once more before you're fully free of the dynamic. In the early stages of waking up to all this, that can genuinely hurt. You might catch yourself comparing your worth to theirs. You might feel discarded or replaced. You might quietly wonder why this new person seems to be getting the version of the narcissist you were always promised but never actually received. But given enough time and distance, you come to understand something important. That new person isn't winning anything. They're simply next in line. They're walking straight into the same maze you just managed to escape from, except they don't know it yet. And there's very little you can do to warn them in a way they'd actually hear. The cycle itself doesn't change from one relationship to the next. The mask never stays fixed in place permanently. The exact same patterns will resurface eventually. The exact same wounds will reopen in someone else. The exact same role you used to play will simply get reassigned to somebody new. That's because the narcissist isn't evolving or growing from any of this. They're reenacting the same script endlessly, compulsively, almost tragically, without any real capacity to break the pattern on their own. And in the middle of all this chaos, you're quietly doing something remarkable, even if you don't fully recognize it as it's happening. You're healing in real time, piece by piece, without a manual to follow. You're learning how to sit with discomfort without abandoning yourself in the process. You're learning to notice manipulation the second it starts instead of falling for it out of habit. You're learning to tell the difference between genuine love and simple longing, between real attachment and trauma bonding dressed up to look like connection, between actual peace and a kind of numbness that only mimics peace from the outside. Your nervous system is slowly relearning what safety actually feels like in the body, maybe for the first time in years. Your intuition is gradually coming back online after being muted and second-guessed for so long. Your sense of self is returning to you in pieces, the way a slow sunrise gradually replaces total darkness without you noticing the exact moment it happened. You might find yourself crying more than usual, or maybe crying far less than you expected to. You might notice your sleep patterns shifting in ways you can't fully explain. You might have dreams that feel eerily like memories, and memories that start feeling more like half-remembered dreams. You might feel anger surfacing that you were never given permission to feel while you were still inside the relationship. Grief that you were never allowed the space to properly express. Confusion that arrives in waves, followed by moments of clarity that feel almost sacred in comparison. None of this is regression, even though it might feel that way in the moment. This is integration. This is your mind and body finally being given the room to process everything they had to suppress just to get you through each day while you were still living inside that dynamic. And then one day, often without any real warning or ceremony, you'll notice something quiet but genuinely profound has shifted. You'll think of them, and you'll feel nothing in particular. Not love, not hatred, not longing, not simmering rage. Just a clean, calm, neutral kind of knowing that doesn't need to argue its case or explain itself to anyone, doesn't need to be understood or validated by another person to feel true. That's the exact moment your nervous system finally lets go of them for good. That's the moment the spell, whatever hold it had over you, breaks completely and doesn't come back. That's the moment you become genuinely unreachable to them, not because you built some kind of wall to keep them out, but because you quietly built an entire self that no longer has room for them inside it. Somewhere in the middle of all this, you'll also notice your relationship with your own mind starting to repair itself, and that part deserves just as much attention as anything involving them. For years, you probably got used to running every decision, every memory, every gut reaction past some invisible internal committee before you trusted it. You second-guessed the things you saw with your own eyes. You talked yourself out of concerns that turned out to be completely valid. You learned, without ever choosing to learn it, that your perception was negotiable and theirs wasn't. That habit doesn't disappear the moment the relationship ends. It lingers in small, quiet ways. You might catch yourself apologizing to a stranger for something that wasn't your fault. You might notice you're still bracing for a reaction that isn't coming anymore, still reading a room for danger that left with them. Rebuilding trust in your own perception is slow, unglamorous work, and it rarely happens in one dramatic breakthrough. It happens in 100 small moments where you notice a feeling, name it correctly, and don't talk yourself out of it. It happens when you say no to something small and the sky doesn't fall. It happens when you catch a manipulation tactic in a completely different relationship, a friendship, a coworker, a stranger online, and you recognize it instantly because you've already lived through the advanced course. That recognition, uncomfortable as it can be, is actually one of the quiet gifts hidden inside everything you went through. You come out the other side with a kind of radar most people never have to develop because most people never needed it. You notice the early love bombing in someone new before it fully lands because you remember exactly how convincing it felt the first time. You notice when someone's story about their ex sounds a little too rehearsed, when every past relationship in their history somehow ends with them as the blameless victim. You notice the subtle testing behavior, the small boundary pushes disguised as jokes, the little comments designed to see how much you'll tolerate before you push back. None of this makes you paranoid or damaged, no matter what anyone tries to tell you. It makes you informed. It makes you someone who paid an enormous price for a kind of clarity most people are lucky enough to never need. The goal isn't to walk through the rest of your life braced for attack. The goal is to trust that you'll recognize the pattern quickly if it ever shows up again, and that trust, once it's solid, lets you actually relax into new relationships instead of white-knuckling your way through them. It's also worth saying plainly that healing from this isn't a straight line, and nobody should expect it to be. There will be days, sometimes months into the process, where a random smell or song or turn of phrase drags you right back into a memory you thought you'd already processed. There will be moments where you catch yourself missing them, not the reality of who they were, but the fantasy version you were sold at the very beginning, the person they pretended to be before the mask slipped for the first time. That missing isn't a sign you're broken or that you secretly want to go back. It's just grief doing what grief does, moving in waves instead of a straight downhill line. Be patient with yourself through those waves. You're not failing at healing just because healing doesn't look tidy from the inside. Seeing through a narcissist isn't just a moment of perception or insight, it's an act of liberation in the fullest sense of the word. It marks the real beginning of psychological freedom, the moment your inner world stops being occupied territory, colonized by somebody else's chaos and unresolved wounds. It's the moment you stop automatically translating their behavior into evidence of your own faults. It's the moment you start reclaiming all the parts of yourself you quietly abandoned just to keep some fragile version of peace intact. Your voice, your softness, your intuition, your laughter, your boundaries, your time, your dreams, your body, your future, all of it handed back to you piece by piece. And here's maybe the most beautiful part of the entire process. You don't need to confront them to be free of them. You don't need to win an argument you were never going to win in the first place. You don't need an apology you know deep down isn't coming. You don't need closure handed to you by someone incapable of giving it. And you certainly don't need to be understood by them to move forward with your own life. Your freedom was never actually dependent on their awakening or their growth or their capacity for change. It depends entirely on yours, and yours has already quietly begun, whether you fully realize it yet or not. The simple fact that you've made it this far, sitting with these words, breathing a little slower, recognizing pieces of your own story in every paragraph, is proof enough that something inside you can no longer be talked out of what it already knows to be true. So take that seriously. Stay with this process because it doesn't end here. It's really only just beginning. There's so much more to understand about what happened to you, so much more healing still ahead, so much more of your own self left to rediscover and meet properly for the first time. The version of you that exists on the other side of this whole awakening is someone you haven't fully met yet. Someone wiser than you are right now. Someone softer in the places that matter and unshakable in ways you can't quite picture from where you're currently standing. And what happens when a narcissist finally realizes you've seen through them completely is genuinely only half of this story. The other half, the part that matters most in the long run, is what happens when you fully realize you were always more than they could ever manage to control. And that realization, however quietly it begins, is the actual sound of your real life finally starting.